Okay, so we're live. Welcome back to the Magic Minds podcast. I'm Matt Burke. You're watching and listening to the Liberties #1 podcast. Yup the Liberties, yup the Flats. On the show today, another series or another episode of our series Yup the Flats. I have Paul Mc Keown. Paul, what's the crack, pal?
What's the crack? Up the Flats.
Yup the Flats.
Indeed.
We've another ginger on the show. Another ginger. The Flats are rampant with gingers. We're related.
We're full of them.
So I've another ginger brother. Guys, I've asked Paul to come on the show. Paul, he works for the civil servant, but he's also an inner city activist. So we're going to talk about life growing up in the Flats and then how we moved into becoming a civil servant and an activist in the Flats. Like most of the stories, I don't think I said this last week or the last interviews, I've done no research for this. I just know that from the Flats, I've done a brief bit of look at what he does, and that's perfect for us. But I'm going to just let the interviews just flow the way they flow. And I'm always interested and love hearing people's stories. So look, Paul, tell us about where you grew up, the Flats that you grew up and that backstory.
So I was born into Andrews Court Flats down in the southeast inner city, just off Pearse Street. The flats that everyone knows in our area is Pearse House Flats. I think it's one of the biggest social housing complexes in Europe. I think Dolphins Barn is one of them as well. But just from me family as well, like on my ma's side, me granddad was basically he was an orphan. Him and his brothers. His mom and dad passed away. You know, TB was rampant then, and they all ended up in industrial schools. And when they got out of industrial schools, like my granddad, he went over to fight in World War II, for the Brits, and you can imagine just growing up, you know, like the Catholic Church, like what he went into an industrial school, and you know yourself, you don't really need to explain what was going on there. But when he came out of there, he hated everything about Ireland, hated the Catholic Church as well, and the job he was able to get at the time, it wasn't because of patriotic reasons or anything. He fought then in World War II for the Brits, and which was a mad story then, because when World War II finished up, me granny was working in an ammunition factory, was from the inner city as well, but was over in Birmingham working in an ammunition factory. So when he came back to Birmingham after the war finished, he met me granny in it. You know, the old ballroom dances, there's the women's on one side, the men's on the other.
Will you dance with me, mate?
Yeah, so that's the thing. So they met over in Birmingham, and me ma was born in Birmingham then, and they came back then to the inner city, and me granny and granddad started a family there. But when they came back then, they had sisters and brothers, and the same, that revolving door then, the brothers had gone into, the brother went into an industrial school, and it was far near enough to nothing, you know, robbing stuff from an orchard. And then on me dad's side, me dad's side were always known in Ringsend as selling the fruit and vegetables, and they'd be going around on the horse and cart, and Willie, me dad's brother that passed away, like, do you know, it was a real, like, I used to love, like, when me dad bring me when I was a kid down to with Willie, and do you know, it was a real Dublin kind of thing. And then, you know, the horse then was replaced with technology, had a van then, but they grew up in the inner city as well, in Ringsend. And then me dad met me mum, and they lived up just, do you know where Oliver Bond Flats, you have the petrol station there. Yeah. Well, there was tenements there at the time, and they got the letter that, because at that time a lot of the tenements were all falling down and people were dying, like they were collapsing. Do you know, if you had heavy rain for a long time, the structures in them were just given. And still have the letter today from Dublin Corporation in the 60s basically saying that this place isn't fit for purpose anymore. You have 2 weeks to accept Andrews Court Flats, and there wasn't any. If you didn't accept it, then you were. So that they moved into Andrews Court Flats and started a family. And interestingly enough, sorry, I just kind of to get the history of
I
how
love it. I'm loving
grew
this.
up in
This is
the
deadly.
the inner city, is that you've probably seen this on reeling in the years and stuff, but where Fenian Street is, where Andrews Court flats are, that was where it was the straw that broke the camel's back, the reason why Ballymun was built, because you had tenements all along Fenian Street, and there were some of the worst tenements in Dublin. A lot of people go on about the ones in the north inner city. The south inner city had really, really bad tenements as well, and the tenements collapsed and killed two kids that were walking by, that were from the area, that were playing the area at the time, and when they died, that's when there was mass uproar. You know, same the way the housing crisis is now. It's, you know, it's always like we think something's going to happen. That was the final thing. Was like, right, we're going to get stuck into building, and the City Key parish area, City Key Pastry, went from a population in the space of 5 years. I think it was like 50,000 down to 11,000. That was the level of displacement. So a lot of the people from that area ended up in Ballyfermot, and the majority were sent out to Ballymun. But for the ones that didn't go to Ballymun or anything, they built flat complexes. So they built Andrews Court, they built Leo Fitzgerald, and obviously you had the really old ones built by Herbert Sims. You had Pearce House flats, Markovich House flats, and then you had the ones up on Mackin Street as well. So that was the history of our flats. And if you walk into Andrews Court flats now, there's a plaque, a big huge plaque, and it was the 12th of June was the anniversary of it just a few days ago. I think it happened in around 1962, but that was a reason why like Andrews Court was built. So it has a big kind of history behind.
And there's a lot of history and connection with you and your family.
Yeah.
Here's the thing I was thinking about when you were talking about your granddad going off and fighting for the British Army. What was the impact on him coming back to Ireland after serving in the British Army? Was there any negative?
No, like he never would really talk about it, like, and do you know, like it was something like he never, like, do you know, I never got any impression of him like that. It was something that haunted him or anything. Do you know, like Grandad was, you know, he's just, you know, like a lot of the older generation, you wouldn't know.
They won't tell you anything.
They wouldn't. You wouldn't know. Like, but there was some stuff like I still remember from being a kid. Like he'd have the cricket on, and I think that the cricket was from when he was over. He was stationed in Africa, so he would have been a lot around Brits, and you would have having Brits there who are like, you know, you had the white Afrikaners as well, like in Rhodesia and stuff, but Zimbabwe now. So I think that was something that rubbed off him. So I just always remember like he'd be always mad into the cricket, and then I remember in the 90s as well, like Steve Collins fighting Eubank, and my granddad was always up for the Brits. He'd be up for Ben, he'd be up for Eubank and all.
What
like,
was that? How was that meeting?
I don't know. Do you know, it was probably just a kind of, you know, when someone does something and they're proud of something, then like,
But sure, look, he did say from the get-go that he was pissed off with the Irish Catholic Society. He was pissed off with the industrial school, so he had a gripe against.
Yeah, well, that's it. Like, and you know,
that's okay.
and especially around then, like a lot of people think especially back then, like, you know, the 40s, the 30s, the 20s, and before that, hundreds of years this went on. People didn't go into wars for patriotic reasons. It was poverty, and basically that's what you done. And you know, it wasn't like kind of like to where now someone has the choice to go into the army. Like that was the employment that was there for him when he came out of an industrial school. You know, so like he, like I sometimes when people will talk about like, the Brits done this or the Irish done that and all, like it's putting yourself, you know, everyone has their own perspective or why they ended up in it doing something like that, or you know. So sometimes when people are like, and it works on both ways, you know, like especially like you'll hear people saying the Republicans and this, and then you'll hear the vice versa, then you know, like the Brits done this and all. So you know, you have to walk in someone's shoes to realise why.
Absolutely great show, Paul. Just within that one family, well, your family, that brief story you just told me there, 2 people going to those industrial schools, that was just rampant right across the city, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The impact of them on families and like, and I've spoke a lot about this in here and other podcasts about generational pain. That has caused a lot of pain in families, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, that's it. And like I know it's something that I've kind of worked in kind of around legislation in my career as well, as that you'll often see, say, stuff to do with, like, say, right, the mother and baby homes, or like if you go to places like Australia and all, the Aborigines, how they were treated and stuff. In Ireland, a lot of the historic oppression that went on was on class, because we were a very homogenous society, and even then, even the traveller community, only up until recently, the government didn't recognise them as a different ethnic group, so they were just being classed as the poor as well. Do you know? So the people who were put generationally into all these, it started all around the poor laws. So you had the poor houses, and basically the poor, like that goes on still in a lot of cities around the world, like Brazil, India. The rural poor flock to the city centre to basically to survive, do you know? And they were in workhouses. But then the Brits at that time established the poor laws. So you had the deserving poor, which was, say, if you were crippled after working and you couldn't work anymore, do you know, or you were, you know, that was kind of seen, as the Brits says, it was like, well, that person is in deserving of some type of pity, to where anyone that was able-bodied, if you weren't going into the workhouses, do you know, like, you weren't deserving of anything. And anyone that basically you had, say, that was that version of the working class at that time, anyone that came them almost the underclass of that. So that's a lot of the inner city community, they were the underclass. They were seen even almost from working class people, and you still see it today. There's like an othering that goes on. It's like, you know, those people from the flats and all, like, you need to be wary of them. But it was the same thing. So when the whole thing, we got independence in 22, the Catholic Church took over social policy, and basically a way of saving people was, and to correct their behaviour, kids as well. They were, the only way you could save them from their poverty was from God, and that was all that whole thing about industrial schools. So anyone that had, you know, this is only poor people, because middle class or rich people,
They don't need saving.
Their behaviour wasn't being, they weren't getting chucked into an industrial school. So it came like workhouses as well. So it was the same kind of othering thing. It was people from predominantly poor areas, not just in the inner city, but in rural Ireland as well. You go to places in rural Ireland, a lot of people are the same, generational. But the trauma that caused, and you still see it in the inner city, like to this day, in terms of incarceration into prisons, the inner city, we make up over 60% of the prison demographic of the prison demographic to this day, and that's generational. And I guarantee, like the studies that have been done in the past, the people that have been in prison, their father or their uncle or their grandfather, they were in prison. And then when you go past that generation, when industrial schools still existed, their grandfathers or their uncles were in industrial schools as well. So there has been an attempt basically to punish the poor in Ireland, and the whole kind of revolving door of a class system. And that's still reflected today as in who goes to prison, what type of crimes, what type of legislation do we have to focus on certain crimes. So the majority of the legislation to this day is heavily enforced on enforcing petty crime or blue collar crime. So it's the crimes committed in the majority by the poor. So we don't see, like, the prison demographic doesn't reflect all the fraud that's gone on in this country. So there has been, like, it's often excluded when we talk about oppression and all in Ireland, but the level of class oppression, particularly to do with certain communities, including the inner city community, and then communities like who were moved out to Ballymun, Tallaght, communities that were displaced from the inner city, they're othered as well, and the same type of treatment is given to them. So, like, going back, that even the time of the industrial schools, that's still having an effect on our community to this day. And like, one person I tip my hat to about all that, Mannix Flynn, like, he done some amount of work to expose that, and you know, he never let it go away. And I think I've seen a good documentary there with him last year on it, and it was showing the generational effects that's had on his family to this day, that they were still, it was a revolving door of people going into prison, and how they were treated by the police, the state. So yeah, that's, for me, I definitely would agree, like, kind of that effect that kind of the industrial skills had on our community.
Wow, I'm blown away by your knowledge and your recall of that information and the way you articulate it. It's absolutely fantastic. And what's jumping out at me is, how did you break the generation of pain? You've grown up in flats like I have. You've obviously returned to, you've done well in school, and you're doing well, which is in life, and you have a phenomenal understanding of social class and so all this kind of stuff. How did you get out of that? Or what was
Yeah,
life like for you growing
like
up in the flats?
when I grew up as a kid, when I was only young, like growing up in the flats, I'm sure like anyone that's grown up in the flats, for me it wasn't like a bad childhood or anything. Like I had a great time, like the things you'd be doing in the flats, like collecting for Halloween, like just for me growing up like playing the five-a-sides, playing the challenge matches, going and playing all the other flats and challenges. And for me I loved growing up in the flats. I've lovely memories of even like the Olympics 1996 and Michelle Smith winning the swim and the gold medals and getting to stay up.
Michelle de Bruin, that's your
Michelle de Bruin, yeah.
that pissed in the cup,
Yeah,
the whiskey.
her. But before all that came out about what she was up to, like getting to stay up, and I remember the whole flats up for it, and then like even the boxing and everyone, like there'd be always some family in like in our flats. There was one family that had Sky Sports, and staying up to watch like McCullough fighting, staying up to watch Nassim Hamed and all. Like it was great growing up in the flats. But when I was growing up, as I was getting older, how I was kind of how you be treated, say like by other people outside of your community. Like even just before I'd kind of go into all that, I suppose what kind of gave me conscious about all this stuff from a very young age. When I was about 6 or 7, the heroin epidemic was really bad. And
How old are you, Paul, by the way?
I'm 31.
Oh, okay, cool.
So around when the heroin epidemic in the 90s, there was like, you had it in the 80s.
Yeah.
I have no recollection of any of that. Like
that's where I grew up.
Yeah, but the 90s, there was a resurgence of it again, and then you had the marches like around, I remember around like 96 and all, I'd be going to the marches with my mum and stuff, and then they'd light the barrel outside the flats to stop any of the dealers coming in, because they'd use the stairwells for using, and there was kind of little doorways we had on each. When you get up to kind of that halfway, in our flats you had like little doors, and you could go in, and you'd be hidden off from that was going on. And at that time as well, the guards didn't really acknowledge it as a problem as long as it was confined to the inner city. But when all that was going on, me and my friends, we were playing one day in the flats, and there was a bottom level flat that was being used to sell drugs, and we ran over and we were like, let us in. And some of the young flats I was with, their older brothers were in there. And then one of them, I remember, said something like, "Do you want a sherbet, these?" I was like, "Yeah, give us a sherbet. Do you remember you dip the lollipop in it, the powdery kind of stuff? Yeah. And do like, hold on there, get you all that. So they came out and they were like, right, put that on your finger and put it in on your tongue, but you all have to do it together. So what this fucker had, he had a caustic soda. So it's for basically industrial strength stuff that if you put it down a drain, all the stuff, the gunk that's been built up in the drain, it will just get rid of it. So me being the main fucker, I put my hand in front of all my mates and got it like that and done it first, and nothing happened for a second, so everyone else done it, and then my mouth just went on fire, and
Jesus
it was like literally I never felt pain like it, like I still remember it. And I ran up to me sister in the flats at the time, and they were ringing an ambulance to come down, and the ambulance wouldn't come down. And I remember then my dad then was over in the pub, he came over, and when all this was happening, then there was murder in the flats. Like my dad baited the head off a few of them, a few other of the dads as well, boxed the head off them. And my dad then carried me, he threw me up on his shoulders and basically ran up he got to the government building at Merrion Square, because there used to be a children's hospital at Harcourt Street.
Yeah.
And the guard at the government building, there's like a little post there saying and he called the ambulance then, and I got collected from there. But I can't remember, like my dad like was saying that they were ringing the ambulance and they just wouldn't come down. But I ended up in Harcourt Street, and they put the camera down my throat on, and they said if I swallowed any of it I would have been dead. And I still have the scars on my tongue to this day. It's a scar that starts at the top and goes across me tongue. So from that age, like, I knew kind of, like, that's when I kind of like got woke up to reality, you know. And it was kind of even the way the guards went about even trying to prosecute anyone. They didn't even really care, you know. Like, and then there was all the kind of stuff then, like the guards were kind of saying, oh well, you know, you need to be careful then, like, you know, if you identify such and such and such and such this. And then there was prominent drug dealers at the time that were kind of running the show in the inner city.
Yeah.
And one, I don't know, I would probably have to delete this out, but Rossi Bourne, he was kind of prowling around basically telling me and the other kids' families that were affected that, you know, just let it be. But the guards never done anything about it. Like, and just from that age, like, I kind of knew the kind of thing that went on, and for a few years then there was tension then with my family and the other families, you know, that were basically gave the drugs to us. And it's mad, like, a lot of those young fellas, they're only about like 8-9 years older than me. Like, a lot of them are dead now.
Jesus.
But that kind of stuck with me. Like, and I was a bit more conscious then of me ma. Then, you know, like, say the kids would be going off somewhere, like, me ma would be like, be careful where you're going. And it wasn't like then I had to be reeled in. I just knew, do you know, like, to behave, to not be doing that and foolish. So it kind of made me think about things and look at things in different ways and stuff. And at that time then I was mad into the football. And at that time, as we all did, like, I thought, you know, I'm going to be a professional footballer when I get older. And just playing with all the kids in the area, and I was playing for Pearse Rangers, and then I was playing with Cherry Orchard, I was playing with Bows as well, and playing with all the same, the majority of the kids I was playing with from the inner city, are from places like Ballyfermot, Tala and stuff. But some things that I remember from that time, like, I remember I was good friends with a fella from Sandymount, and it was scorching in Ringsend Park one day, and we were going over as a teenager, and went into Sandymount, and then he was like, oh, if Sunny Delight in the fridge, I'll go over and get some. So he was sitting outside, and his man knew me because we played football together, but didn't want him hanging around with me for no reason at all, just because she thought I was a ruffian, you know.
Because you're from the flats.
Yeah, and I remember she ran out of the gaff, and basically was like, get out of my garden, you fucking knacker, you, and don't be hanging around with, call our son's name, you don't be near him again. I still hung around with him, but obviously I never went back to the gaff, like, but that was this whole thing that she thought, like, she was protecting our son, that he couldn't be around, and he was, do you know what I mean? I wasn't in any trouble, that, like, I wasn't doing any harm, do you know, I played football with him. But even around all that time, like, all the amount of times the guards would just bait into the flats and grab all of us and fucking lift us up and all, give us a clatter for doing nothing. But at that time you just thought as normal.
Yeah.
And you just thought that's the way everyone else was treated.
Yeah, right, same.
Do you know? But as you get older and realise that that's not how people, like I even remember, like, just in me, like, early 20s, and talking to college students and stuff, and they'd be like, oh, you know, like, certain communities in Ireland, like, are treated really bad by the guards. And I say, yeah, well, you know, people in the inner city who are treated like that as well. And the level of ignorance they would have, it was almost like we deserved it, the way other communities didn't deserve how they were treated. But just from kind of that experience, and then the whole even thing, just even innocent things, you'd go to an underage disco and you wouldn't even be able to, you'd have to change your accent, and, you know, 13 years of age, and everyone is saying to each other, tuning each other up, you need to change your accent, and you don't go to that school, you go to this school. It was in Donnybrook, it was some German school or something. So when you be going up to the Becktov, like, for the underage kiddies disco and all, and then Coyote Lounge on Delair Street, think it's called Club 21 now. It's the same thing, like, oh, where are you from? Like, oh, you know, and he'd be trying to put on a posh accent and stuff. But they were all the things that kind of accumulated. And then...
And consolidate that you're not a good human being and you're
Yeah,
from a
that's it.
lesser
And
than.
then, like, even... I remember even when the Docklands, and my ma would always say it was like, oh, well, do you know, they're promising that, like, yous are going to be the future of the area and all, and they were saying that when they were basically knocking down all the warehouses on the waterfront of the Docklands. They were like, 10% of all the jobs that come here, it's all going to go to the area. And that was the biggest load of pony. And I remember them all coming in, the employers and all, at the start, like in the early 2000s and all. And it was basically like they came in and, you know, they gave us T-shirts and all, took a few photos and all, and then they were gone. But, you know...
Just butty is up.
Yeah, but that was the thing I vividly remember. The same thing that's happening around the Liberties now with gentrification. It happened in the Docklands first, with Sheriff Street, with Pearse Street, with Rings End. The gated apartments went up, the walls went up, these glassy offices went up, and it was clear, like when you go down to Sheriff Street and Pearse Street, you can see how divided it is. You've gated communities where a lot of the people working in these companies are working, and it is, from even a young age at that time, like it was clearly divided, and like you had the gated communities and then you had the local community, and then all the people working in the jobs, literally, perhaps like even me ma was a cleaner in one of the offices, the security guards, or they would sponsor the local team and all, but not any real meaningful. So that all
Just
that
tokenistic.
stuff, yeah, all that stuff growing up, I was very aware of it. But when I was growing up, I was still mad into the football, and I wasn't the best at education, you know, like, and me dad had a big problem. He couldn't read and write till he was a teenager, and just in school, like, you know, like I was good at history and stuff, but I wasn't good in articulating how you would be able to write anything and stuff. And so when I was a teenager, I got an opportunity to go over to play football in Scotland. So my leaving cert was a failed leaving cert. I just done some subjects in it, and went over. I was living in Scotland, playing football for Hamilton. You probably know James McCarthy.
Yeah.
So I played James McCarthy, James McCarther, McGovern, the Northern Ireland goalkeeper. They were on the team when I was playing there. But like the majority, when I was over there, it was a brilliant experience, and I got took out of living in the inner city, just kind of thinking, you know, I had to kind of grow up because didn't have my ma to make the food for me anymore. I was basically, you know, I had to learn how to cook, learn how to take care of myself, learn how to wipe my arse, basically, you know, like, so.
Deadly.
So, what was a brilliant experience, and I had a relation in Glasgow as well, and one of my mates who was playing for Celtic's youths as well, he was in Glasgow as well, and that was another reason why I chose Glasgow, because I had trials for Inverness up the top of Scotland, and this place, it was like if you just landed in the middle of Glendalough, and it's freezing year round. Like the snow starts in October, so Glasgow for me actually felt a lot like Dublin.
Right.
Like it really, like, had that, like, you go even down where the Rangers Stadium and all is, it reminds you of being...
Were they
around.
down by the Barrows? No, that's where Celtic is.
No, it's Celtic is near there.
It's
But
the Barrows.
the Rangers, all the area around there, it reminds you all of like the Liberties, where you're walking around the streets, real working class and stuff. But I loved it over there, and it really opened my eyes, because when I was over there, it was like, you realise that only a small percent make it, and even if you're performing well, like, a lot of it's luck, do you know?
Yeah.
Like, our team, the under-19s, used to play the first team, Hamilton team, in training every Thursday, and we'd hop off them, and the manager couldn't give a, do you know, he didn't even bother watching, do you know? So that was this kind of thing. I was like, if this doesn't work out, what am I going to do, do you know? I don't even have a past leaving cert. So I was thinking then, when I was over there as well, like, do you know what, I need to start thinking about how I can actually have a life for myself. So when I was over there, I looked into kind of joining the Scottish Police, I looked into joining the Northern Irish Police, and then I was looking into joining the Guards as well. But you know, you needed a certain education for it. So
and you need to have Irish.
I couldn't, you know, like, so just with that as well, like when I was playing for Hamilton, I was lucky enough, I got a few call-ups to the Northern Ireland underage team. So I couldn't get into the Republic team, and I thought that I should be getting into the Republic team. So they weren't showing any interest, so I was able to play for Northern Ireland through my dad's side. And Mal Dottany was the manager at the time. I don't know if you've ever heard of Mal Dottany. He played in the famous '82 World Cup Northern Ireland team that beat Spain. He played in the 1986 World Cup team, and he won the British Championship as well. But absolute brilliant experience. It was another eye opener, because when I was playing with the Northern Ireland team, I was around predominantly young flits from West Belfast and Falls Road and the Shankill, Sandy Row. Shankill and the Sandy Row is like the Sheriff Street, Pearse Street working class areas of Belfast. And being around those young flits and seeing like that, it was again kind of when I was growing up as a kid, it was like, it doesn't matter Catholic or Protestant, and it's a thing I'd get pissed off about now and then, the way people will, belittle like working class Protestants sometimes, is that the lives they had and the lives they grew up wasn't in any way that much better than the Catholics, and sometimes it was even worse. And because when I came good friends with a lot of the Protestants as well on the team, and going into the Shankill, and how they, now other people's experience could have been totally worse, but because through sport I had a brilliant experience with people from that community, and they treated me in a really nice way, and I'm still good friends with a lot of the people I met through the Northern Ireland team from the Shankill and Sandy Row. So that was another thing that opened my eyes, because I remember I was playing on the team, and our manager would say to us all the time, like, you, whatever, orange or green, you are Irish, and he joked, like, I remember, like, he'd be saying like they're like McGovern or whatever, McGovern there from the Falls Road, Evans there from Shankill. I can't remember the names he was calling off at the time. Then he was like, and then McKeown there from inner city Dublin. He was like, "Yous are Irish," and whether he is orange or green, and he'd say that to us before the matches and stuff, like to go out and be playing matches, So it was brilliant, unbelievable experience. But that as well kind of gave me kind of a social conscience about when I'd come home. So when I got home, I was very unfortunate, because I literally came home when the arse fell out of the economy 2008. So I was like, right, well, it was actually a blessing in disguise, because I was like, right, well, I can't get a job. I actually need to go back and get an education. So I got FETAC level 5, so that was like a little window that was allowed me to get into college.
Yeah, I did the
same. I didn't have the points.
Yeah, same. I done that.
And there's usually a route for a lot of the tech institutes, is that you can get in through the FETAC.
Yeah.
So I done the FETAC, done it in criminology, social studies, and when I was doing that, because I was still thinking about having a career in the police, I had to go back and get the leaving cert, finish it. So I done Irish again and done maths again, and I basically passed that. So that qualified me then that I had enough marks to come a guard. So, but there was a recruitment embargo on in 2008. It lasted until 2013. So what I done, I joined the Garda Reserve. The Garda Reserve was kind of like what they introduced. It was kind of like a stepping stone to becoming a full-time guard. So I was doing that and doing college as well. And while I was in college, I had a brilliant time in the Garda Reserve. I used to do one shift, usually every Friday, every second Friday or whatever. Like, it used to be a kind of around that Fridays or Saturday. And just from that experience, what again I was witnessing all the time, a brilliant experience, and I got to see kind of things from the guard side. But what also kind of opened me eyes up to, you were never changing anything. The guards were always the last port of call of what, say if you have a cancer, of an issue of a lot of social issues that have festered and festered.
Okay.
And then you are responding to the crimes then from a lot of that. So it was always, basically, it was just time and time again, you were arresting working class people. You were going into working class areas, and And what happens then from that is that guards get emotionally kind of, do you know, like, because there's a lot of emotions at play and stuff, and that's where they're being told to focus on, do you know. So they develop, sometimes they can have a hatred then for who they're policing. They take things personal, the same way someone gets arrested take things personal, and you just see how much of a vicious cycle it is.
Of course.
And that was another thing. So when I was in college, I was learning kind of a lot about this, and I was actually, do you know, like, the things that needs to change, like, I'm not going to be able to change any of that going into the guards full time. Where I'll be able to change that is through legislation or through policy.
What's the course that you chose?
I was doing community and social development, so I was a level 8 in Blanchardstown. So when I was thinking about that, when I was in Blanchardstown college, the thing that used to drive me mad, just getting back again to the whole thing around equality, always seeing kind of the issues going on in the guard, seeing the things I was experiencing growing up, or even in Belfast and Glasgow, there was a lot of class inequality that I always noticed, that they were the people going to prison, they were the people getting hassled by the guards, the media as well. And when I went into college then, I was in college then, and I started to kind of understand how you would address these issues through legislation, through social policy. It was that it was all done on the 9 grounds. And for anyone here that's listening, what I'm talking about with the 9 grounds is that in equality legislation in Ireland, we have what's called the Employment Equality Act and the Equal Status Act, and it's on 9 grounds. So it's gender, age, religion, sexuality, membership of the travelling community, and the one big gaping gap in it they've left out is social economic background, which is basically class. So what's happened a lot is all this stuff, equality stuff that's been moving in academic circles, that's been moving in social justice spaces, has all, because of this equality legislation that was brought in 1998, it's completely moved away from class, and it's completely moved into kind of siloed approaches to address inequalities. But that's brilliant, because it's gave all those groups rights-based approaches. Like, right, if I'm a woman and I'm working in a job and the man's doing the same job as me and I'm getting paid 10 grand less, I can challenge that. If there's a collective group of women getting paid less to be cleaners and there's men cleaning, they can challenge that, or vice versa. If men are experiencing it, they can do it. If travellers are experiencing discrimination, they have rights now, they have tools that can hold the state, employers and services to account. Big example is travellers trying to book a wedding, trying to book a funeral, a baptism, anything like that. If someone refuses them, they can go to what's called the Workplace Relations Commission, and they can challenge that and make a complaint. And if it's found that the people have discriminated against them, the employer, the service, there's huge repercussions for it financially, and they need to put the changes in place. Same employers, you go to Facebook, to any employer, they need to have policies, procedures on harassment, which is basically bullying, but it's on the 9 grounds. They need to have policies on sexual harassment. When the state is implementing equality even into the civil service, we need to have a diverse workforce, but it's only on the 9 grounds. When Facebook is talking about diversity, it's on the 9 grounds. They're leaving out, basically Facebook is beside Pierce House Flats and Sheriff Street. They're not talking about bringing people in from there because they don't have to. They're not legislation obligated. So when I was in college, I'd be listening always to the lectures, and I don't mean in any disrespect to them, but when they be talking about equality, it was almost like they were reading it from a civil rights book in the States, and I'd be saying to them, are you completely blind to what's happening in the inner city for generations? The heroin epidemic, the industrial schools, why is class left out? And some teachers, you know, agreed with me. To others, it was almost like they were demeaning me, belittling the experience that happens working class people. So that really lit a fire in my belly. I was
I
like,
can see that in your facial expression. Even you just saying it, your face has changed.
Yeah, that's it. So that's the thing. It stuck in me that, like, this is something that has to change. And the thing that, as anyone that grows up in the inner city, you have a real connection to the people that are from there. You have a real connection. What's happened to a lot of families is that it really, like, I was like, you know, I could do a career in something else, but this is something that really needs to change. This is something that has to change, because it will give community groups, it will give, like, the Swan Centre and Sheriff Street, the community centres up here as well. Like, it will give them that. It will give them tools to address issues around housing. It will give them, you know, it will give them an anchor to hold, say, Dublin City Council to account. It will make sure if the civil services doing recruitment, that they do it. Say they do it on social class as well.
Yeah.
Or even stuff like you should probably see now kind of the inner city. There's gentrification going on. A lot of the new services are catering to the professional class. They don't want, you know, they're not. They didn't create their business in a lot of these communities now to cater for the inner city community. It's for the clientele, high income clientele, and their prices as well. So if you look at even say gym memberships, what you'll probably notice when you go to a lot of gyms privately, they offer corporate discounts, student discounts. Now they'll have discounts on that, and then you have public gyms, and there's universities that's doing this. They'll do corporate discounts, discounts for the Oireachtas, for government members, discounts for students, discounts for employers. So the person there's a university in Dublin Central beside Pearse Street. Can't name it because
I know,
going into legal reasons, but you get the picture.
Yeah.
They don't put a discount for the local community, who disproportionately is the lowest income out of all those groups. So basically, if you take a lone parent who rocks up to that university and says, I want to join with my kids, yeah, they'll need to pay the joining fee, which is a fortune. In some cases it varies from €200, and then with the private gyms in the area it's €500, and then they'll have to pay the highest monthly fee. So they need to pay that fee to where someone in Google, who they want to attract because it's good for business, they'll attract that person. They waiver the joining fee, and they give them a discounted rate, and if they get a friend of a friend from their company to join as well, they can get their membership knocked down.
Wow.
Now, if you had a social economic ground and equality legislation, that's another thing where a community could get together and be like, we've had enough of this. Write a letter to the gym or to the college and say, look, you know that under equality legislation you can't treat lower social economic groups unfairly compared to other groups. Or you could get, say no one's getting behind you, say that happened yourself and you went up to a gym and you're on social welfare, you could basically take a complaint then and go to the Workplace Relations Commission. If they were to basically establish then that you were treated unfairly, the adjudicator could award you damages, and also make sure that they, usually what they do is like they recommend a number of courses of action that service needs to do. So it could be diversity training, and it could be also that you need to include, like they make an order that you need to include that provision for discounts. So they're the other things that it will empower working class people. So from being in college, that just lit a fire in my belly, that I was always conscious about that, and I explored it further. I looked into countries around the world and in Europe where in their kind of civil rights law, their equality legislation, which countries had social class included, social economic status. So I kept kind of building up, and then just from myself, from my friends, what you'd see in the media, I was always conscious of where people are being discriminated on social economic status. So that was informing me as well, because you would get a lot of people who haven't experienced this type of discrimination being like, yeah, but what's social class discrimination? Like, there's no social class in Ireland. Like, people don't, you know, but this is coming from people that never experienced it.
Yeah.
And then to be telling me, like, look, these are all the examples, and this is how we legislate. Usually it was always coming from people of a very privileged position who didn't really understand or never experience class. And in a way, that's not to knock them, because it's just something they've never experienced. There's some things, as we've grown up, like, that we've had, say, privileges about, that we've never, like, experienced this, so we sometimes don't understand it, you know what I mean? So that was a thing that I noticed in college, and I was hoping then to get a job then in kind of around that to change that. So when I finished college, I ended up working in kind of detention centres for kids. And from working in the detention centres, again, it was the same kind of thing that I was noticing. It was kids generational. Their fathers had been in prison, their grandfathers had been in prison, and it was almost like you were always arriving at where, like, the best way you can describe is like where a cancer starts off small and just gets to a stage where you can't really do that, and you can give a medication to treat it, to kind of keep it at bay, but you know it's just always going to flare up.
It's like standing on the beach and trying to hold the tide back, isn't
Yeah,
it?
that's it. Like, you know, and sometimes the tide's going to go out for a bit, but you know it's coming back in.
Yeah.
So
That must be heartbreaking, isn't it?
yeah, but that was the thing. I think it was, you know, when you experience all that growing up, like you experience like growing up around that, it was like you were getting a degree that you'd never be able to get in a college.
Oh,
You know,
unreal.
so it informed
Absolutely.
everything to where when it got to the stage where I am now in my career, or even the issue that I'm pushing to get this included in the legislation, it's got to the stage now where you know when you've mastered something and you know exactly what you're talking about, you know the whole background behind it. You can easily, if you're in a room and the topic around that is being, and you're around complete experts, you don't feel in any way shy to explain to them or to talk to them, be like, this is the way it needs to be implemented. Or if you're talking to the most senior of management, where they're the ones that can make the difference, and you're like, look, this is the way it can go into place, this is how it's legislated on, this is the countries that it's in, and you have that ownership then,
And you have the lived experience.
and the lived experience of it as well, that some of the experts don't have, and that's another strength of it, is that a lot of the experts don't know the actual example, especially in an Irish context, of how it affects people from the inner city. So just from being and working in that detention centre, I was able to get, I was thinking then about, like, it was like, for a while then I was like, oh, do you know, this stuff is kind of driving me mad, like I don't know if I want to keep working in this. And I was doing a postgraduate at the time then in Trinity College, and I was thinking like, oh, I wouldn't mind like working in a job then, like for a multinational for a while, or you know, like working at something just to get out of that, because I was starting to kind of think like, I don't want to be, because if you look particularly where people in working class communities, like really staunch deprived working class communities, like places like in the inner city, or even the traveller community you get away as well, the majority of us are all working in social justice areas. Do you know, it's like the only type of jobs we can get is in something to do with
Okay.
do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I can see
our
where you're going with
employment
this.
is
Yeah.
always in you then helping others to escape an issue that you experienced. Do you know what I mean? And for a while I was like, do you know what, I want to escape that and get into some job. And when I got the postgraduate then, a thing I came very familiar with again then is with all these jobs on like Facebook, PwC, Google. When you're getting into them when you've just finished college, they all have these, they call them prestigious, but they're not prestigious. They're called like graduate programs. And I was talking to a lot of people in my class, and people who had, you know, brothers, cousins, peers, like middle class kids and adults that knew the system, knew how to get into a lot of these programs. And for me, it was all new. And I was like, yeah, do not just you get the degree, you send a cover letter, and then you go for the interview, and you're like, no, it's nothing like that. You need to have the best junior cert results, you need to put your school, you need to put your leaving cert results, you need to put your leaving cert school, and you need to make sure it's all about, you know, this, it's all about networking, you know. So they'd say to me like, you need to know people in the company. I was like, I don't know anyone in the companies. I was like, yeah, my ma worked as a cleaner and so on, you know. Can I use her as a reference?
It's
you know?
back to jobs for the boys, isn't
Yeah,
it?
you
And
know, yeah, well, that's it. So I was then being like, so I was learning all this from them, you know. I was listening, like, it was like, so this is how you get into the graduate programs and all, like. And then it was getting me pissed off. Like, you know, I'd go for a drink sometimes, and then I'd have to stop myself getting bitter by it. Do you know, like, they be saying to me like, oh, do you know, like my dad was helping me, or like or you know, me cousin was helping me because he works in one of these companies, and there's a certain way you need to hit buzzwords, because when you apply for a lot of these graduate programs, because so many people apply, the first stage is usually a computer, which is basically extracting the buzzwords. Do you know what I mean? So I was just like, you know, how do I even get my foot in the door and any of this? So I got really like possessed in trying to get through a lot of them, but I couldn't. Like, it was going on when I finished my postgraduate. Everyone that done the postgraduate, we were all in employment, and a year went on. I was still on the scratcher, and I was basically all the multinational graduate programs. Right, what you do is you need to put your junior cert results and your school. So they were forcefully getting to establish they knew what school I was going to in the NSCE. Then leaving cert, I had a failed leaving cert, so I had to put the failed leaving cert, and then I had to put, like, 3 years later, the subjects that got me. But it wasn't like, but they add up the points then. So there are two aspects of the marking criteria, and then they have internal employee reference scheme. Now you can only attach the reference for the majority, and about 90% of the graduate programs have this option. If you know someone in the company, and that gets you another aspect of the points. So, but I didn't know anyone in the company. I couldn't get any of the references. So that was another one that was strike off 3 parts of the application, and then the other bit was the degree. So I had a degree, but that was only one aspect of it. So every application I was putting in, I was just wasn't getting past any of the stages. But then I was getting cute and clever. I was writing fake applications. I was putting in fake junior cert results, fake leaving cert results, and putting my degree in. And then I'd get through to the next stage, and then I'd say to the recruiter, I was like, look, why does it matter if I'd say to them, I was like, look, I put fake junior cert results, I put fake leaving cert results, but I was doing that because I was trying to get my foot in the door to get a bleeding interview from you. No, well you can't do that. And then I'd be saying to the recruiter, I was like, look, this is completely unfair. Like, I wasn't sent to a private school. I mean, my and dad didn't work in any good position. Like I was getting desperate. I was like, just give me a bleeding interview, like, for a job. So that's where I was getting to the stage where, and I was saying to my partner at the time, I was just like this, like, what's the point of even trying to get a job? And then there were some people, like, in my flats then, who were selling drugs and stuff, and making money through different ways and stuff. And I was like that's probably the life that I'm supposed to live. Like, what's the point of me trying to get on in life and stuff? And I was on the social welfare at the time, and I remember then I was talking then to another one of my friends that, great fella, but and he'd say it himself, given kind of a lot of chances in life, and he had the connections, and he was saying to me, you need to get an internship. And then I was like, yeah, right, well, where do you do the internships? He was like, a lot of the NGOs, they do the internships and you can apply for them. So I was like, right, I'll apply for the internship. So I applied for the internship, got it, and then I was like, do I get any type of allowance? And they were like, no, it's unpaid. And I was like, it's unpaid for what, 6 months while I'm doing it? Yeah. And I was like, well, I won't be able to afford that. I was saying to the person, I was like, well, like, it's unpaid. And but they were talking to me, and this what was the gas thing about it. That unpaid internship was with a big NGO, and they were fighting, like, quote unquote, social justice issues and inequality issues, but they couldn't even see the class aspect in that. That person was talking. They weren't talking to me in a rude way or anything, but they couldn't even see that all their people who got that internship before me were all, say, people that came from fairly privileged backgrounds, and that they didn't have to worry about doing a 6-month unpaid internship. So I was like, right, what, I'll take it. So I went to the social welfare then. You have to show, you need to prove that you're working and stuff, or you're looking for work. And I went up to the hatch and I was like, look, I had to get in this internship, but it's definitely going to get me foot in the door, because this is what you kind of need now. It's not just the degree, and I don't have the leaving cert or the junior cert. And I was like, if you go on that, we're taking you off the job, or taking you off the job seekers allowance.
Sweet Jesus.
And I like
they just couldn't see.
Yeah, I actually get emotional thinking about it sometimes. Like, I literally went outside the social welfare and just started bawling my eyes out. I was just like, I can't get into a job. Like it was just mad. Like, and I was literally just about to give up. Like, and I applied then for the civil service. And what I done at that time, there was one woman in the social welfare, And I went back in and I was talking to her and I was like, look, I can't get into a job. I'm trying, but there's always barriers. And she was saying to me, we have this thing called employability, and I noticed on your I noticed on your form that you have dyslexia, so you'd be able to do the you'd be able to go through the employability.
I think they're great service employability. I use them.
Yeah, so the reason why, just going back there, because I forgot to mention it, when I was in college, another great thing that happened to me in college was when I was in the classes, I was engaging and I was having great discussions with the lecturers, and like being able to express myself, like talking to them and stuff. And they said to me then one day, about like 6 months into the course, they said, Paul, can I have a word with you? And they were like to me, look, the reason, like, when you're submitting assignments, like you submitted an assignment there for presentation and I marked you got full marks, and then but your written assignments, like, they're really bad. Like it's like it's a totally different person. And I was like, yeah, I know, because I was like, I don't really understand grammar. And I said to him, like, me dad had kind of the same issue, like, and my ma just done primary school as well, same as me dad. And he sent me to a thing called the National Learning Network, and I was out in Blanche, and I went there, and they basically done the test. I explained the history, and they says, this stuff with dyslexia can intersect sometimes with poverty and, not being educated, because it's like, when kids learn a language at like 1, 2, 3 and 4, they come fluent. But if you start learning a language when you're 20, you will always speak in a way that people will know you're not fluent. Even if you master, there's certain things that you'll never get. So that's the way they were explaining it. But once I done that, they gave me a load of support, and I got these things called reasonable accommodation, so I'd get like a scribe, but it all worked, like that sorted a lot of the issues I had. But that time that happened to me with the social welfare, then they referred me on to employability, and this woman would help me then, kind of like help me, so that kind of gave me another lease of energy to keep applying for the jobs. So I was applying then for the jobs, and she was helping me then kind of like word them, because all I was saying to her, I was like, I just need to get into an interview. If I get into an interview, that's where I know I'm going to get the job. And she was like, yeah, no, I know even just from you talking, like, and then when you're writing, it's like a different person, it's not the same person. So just when I was doing that, then she put me into loads of training things, and then I done mock interviews. There was this thing for people in the inner city, it was for migrants as well, for travellers as well, but it was letting them actually get like mock interviews. So I done a mock interview with AIB at the time, and they stopped the interview halfway through and said, sorry, you don't need any guidance. Like, that's what he said to me. He was like, you should be in a job. Like, I don't know how you haven't getting into a job. And then I was like to him, I can't get through the application stages, and I was explaining to them. But for that person, they were saying that was never an issue for them, because they had a great junior cert, they had a great leaving cert. So I was explaining how that's a barrier for people like from the inner city or travellers or whatever, is that for us just to get the degree, like, that's what you should just be looking at. Even sometimes it's not even the degree, if you have the competencies to do the role. So that's what they were saying to me. But I had a bit more motivation about it, and I was applying for jobs at the time, and then I became good friends with a load of, I'm sure you see now, there's a lot of Brazilians around the inner city now, and around that time, 2013, 2014, became really good mates with a good few Brazilians. And I was like to them one time, like, because they sometimes would be talking Portuguese together, and I'd hear some words they'd say, like they'd go pronto, and I was like, I say pronto, and you're like, and then they'd say sometimes morto, and I was like, we say morto. Do you know when people are embarrassed or something? Or pronto, are you ready? And then I just said to them, look, when you are texting me, text me in Portuguese on WhatsApp, and I'll respond. And then my mate then start teaching me Portuguese, And I don't know what it was, but I took to it, and I started learning it, and I got better, and I got better, and I got better, and it was this weird thing where it was like, I don't know, I just really took to it, and I got stuck into it, and I got basically like today now I'd speak working proficiency Portuguese, but when I was learning it with him, one of them worked for a whiskey company in Dublin, and he said to me one day, he was like, they're looking for an Irish, like an English native speaker who speaks Portuguese to sell the whiskey brand in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, and you're going to be a shoe-in for this, because what other Irish person speaks Portuguese? And especially around that time there wasn't really anyone, and he was like, you need to make a video application. And so he helped me make it, but he didn't tell anyone in the job that he was helping me, do you know, with this, and they didn't know I was applying for it either, like, but he was like, you know, make it this way, and this is the way you have to make. So it made it really good applications, you know, speaking in Portuguese, and explaining me knowledge about kind of Brazil and all, from me mates. And then I was texting them then for a while, a few weeks after that, and I was like, did anyone else apply? And like, we still haven't got anyone else, no one else has applied. And I was like, Jesus, you know, me luck could be in for this. And then about a month later, got the letter. Thank you for your application. However, unfortunately, at this time, we didn't choose you. We'd like to encourage you to apply again for our graduate ambassador programs. So didn't think anything of it. I was still working through the employability, getting there. I done a thing then through the employability when all this was going on, called the WAM program.
Wow, yeah,
to give people with disabilities an opportunity to work in the civil service. And I was going through the application, and I got me interview with the Department of Justice, and I passed it. And they basically said you'd be starting about 4 to 5 months with the Department of Justice at the grade of executive officer. It's like a junior management level, and you get to work for 6 months in that role. So I was looking forward to that, and I was getting kind of ready to start that, and I'd met with the office and stuff. And when this was going on, I was conscious as well that wouldn't give me a full-time job in the civil service. You still need to apply the way everyone else does. So the employability officer was helping me with aptitude tests, and it was that whole thing. When I look at an aptitude test, it's just all these shapes floating around. I don't understand what it is, and especially for people with dyslexia, they're at a real disadvantage with it, because you'll have these arrows and triangles and numbers, and you're supposed to know what's coming next.
I struggle with that.
Yeah, and so I couldn't get through the thing, and then the employability officer was saying to me, you know, sometimes, like, I was talking to some of the people in social protection, and sometimes the civil service have recruitment that comes up where it's cover letters, like you just have to apply to a cover letter and that's it, but it's usually the independent departments, you know, that are under the civil service, but like say the Data Protection Commission, the Legal Aid Board. So when all this was going on, me hopes were much more up about it, but then just as all this was going on, as I was waiting to start for the WAM program, the Brazilian fella, he's half Portuguese as well. He said to me, look, can you meet up with me? And I was like, yeah, what's the story like? So I thought it was just meeting up with him, like, you know, just for the chat. And when I met up with him, he was like, look, I didn't know how to say this to you, but when you applied for that job, like we have a WhatsApp group in our job, and we talk on it now and then, like, and when we got your application, they start talking about your application kind of on the WhatsApp, kind of joking, like, did you get a load of your man doing the application? And you were like, which one was this for? Was this for the Spanish stream or the Portuguese, the one in Sao Paulo? Because they do loads of different ones, like they send them over to work in loads of different companies. And they were like, no, the one for Brazil. Oh, the knacker that speaks Portuguese. And that was what was going on in the WhatsApp conversation. And I hit the bleeding roof about it. And he was like, no, look, wait, don't do anything yet. I'm going to work for a different company in Lisbon in a few weeks. And he was like, once I go, you can do whatever you want with it. And that brought me to what I was talking about there earlier again, you know, the whole thing with the 9 grounds, the equality legislation.
Class.
If you're discriminated against, you can take a complaint. But it has to be on one of the 9 grounds. You can go to the Workplace Relations Commission if an employer discriminates against you. But they were calling me a knacker because of my accent, my social class. They weren't calling me a knacker like because, say, someone's a traveller. And that was the difficult part about it. So I had this basically in a WhatsApp conversation. He gave me emails as well, but the emails were much more formal. It was just like, wasn't a social and cultural fit for the position. Did express the competencies, but didn't, fairly formal. But the WhatsApp, they were joking about it. And then some other person in the WhatsApp conversation, who my mate told me was American, basically says, what's a knacker? And then someone wrote back, surf version of white trash. So they were having a great time laughing and joking like about the application. Now I say this goes on all the time, but lucky enough, unbeknownst to them, they didn't know, that he was like your man working for the company. Like, he encouraged me to apply for it. So the other people in that group didn't know, like that his mate had submitted an application.
So it was hard for him as well.
Yeah, so that's he kind of felt a bit, and then I was like, look, I know. He was like, because he was thinking as well, people that don't know about equality legislation or that, and he was like, surely you'd be able to take a complaint. And I was like, look, there's 9 grounds in the equality legislation, but the fact that this is so blatant, I probably strategically be able to take the case but fail. So the adjudicator looks at the case and says, person's been clearly treated unfairly, however, this isn't one of the protected grounds in the equality legislation, and then I would lose. But what I was thinking then, if I lost, the media would say, and TDs, like I was on to Chris Andrews, I was on to other politicians in their city as well, they were saying, like, surely, if this came out, someone had been treated so unfairly, it would expose, this is another reason why the government can't keep trying to keep class out of the equality legislation. So I contacted the Workplace Relations Commission, and I couldn't get the customer service part of it. I was just saying, yeah, no, but it's not on one of the grounds. And then I actually went to the employer that I work with now, the Human Rights Commission and the Equality and Human Rights Commission in the civil service, and I met with one of the legal officers, and they were like, you can't take the complaint through the equality legislation. You might have a small window of a chance to take a complaint through data protection, because I brought up to him, I was like, look, my mate is obviously worried about, it's going to come fairly clear that he gave me this private information, and I'm worried about that. So he was like, if you make a data protection request, but this fellow was saying to me, obviously they're not gonna give you that, they'll give you your application, your file, the emails that were constructively talked about, but they're not going to release a WhatsApp conversation to you. So I was just like, what, it brought me back just talking again about growing up in the inner city, experiencing discrimination, my mates, the community experiencing that historic discrimination. When I tried to escape, to not even want to work in equality, the fucking thing had bleeding come back to me again, and this whole thing around class discrimination that I couldn't even, and that's where it was almost like it happened to me for a reason, because literally just when that happened, then a few months later a job came up in the civil service in the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and I applied for it at executive officer level grade. And when I went into the interview, and it was a cover letter, and the employability officer helped me, I learned off the competencies, done the interview, and in my interview, that's what I said to them. I was very blunt, and as I said, look, all this work on equality and human rights, it completely excludes social class, and the one big gaping gap in the work that we do on equality and human in Ireland is our leaving out social class. And as I mentioned, I was like, outside even where we're doing this interview, has the highest concentration of segregation and unemployment in the state, but we don't even recognise that. We're looking at reports, it's all on the 9 grounds. And lucky enough, I thought I was getting a bit too cheeky, too upfront in the interview, but I got the job. Now, that because of that happened to me, I ended up then in something then that I was really passionate about. So what I would say to people, like, just even if anyone else are going through, it's all in the experience of what you're going through, whatever knockdown you're getting. Sometimes it's happening for a reason, because when you then come back full circle, then there's no one then that'll have that experience or whatever you're very passionate about that's working in. And like even this whole issue around the exclusion of social class, I say this in the most respectful way, but there's no one working in the equality area, because disproportionately a lot of people working in the equality human rights area, they come from very like privately educated background. Like they're very passionate about equality, but that lived experience aspect they don't have. So when I got into that area, then I hit the ground running, because it wasn't just like it was an area I was learning about. I knew all the laws around it. I knew all the real life experience. I knew all the stats. I knew the history of the inner city and other communities that was affected by these issues as well. So that's where I got into today. So that's where I'm working in the civil service, and I've got, lucky enough, I was able to get promoted again to higher executive officer level, which I'm currently at. And lucky enough then I finished very close on a panel to be going promoted again to assistant principal level. So I'm just hoping now, can't say the name of the department that, like, just on air, but I'm literally next in line to go into it. But that all those jobs and those promotions I got, and even the one I'm waiting on now that I'm on the panel, that was because of everything that was happening to me growing up, me lived experience, going to college and realising it being excluded again, and then all the work I was doing in me projects, me thesis was all on exploring the implementation of a social economic ground, the equality legislation. Do you know, so it built up, and even when I tried to get away from it, I realised that, you know, obviously something that happened to me for a reason. What happened to me that time, do you know, that was a once in a million chance that happened to me, because usually when things happen to people, when they're discriminated against, it's done in a very subtle way, and I was just a lucky fucker that knew someone in the job at that time who was able to give me and it drew me right back in. And I went in, like you were saying there when I was talking about the equality, when I went in for that interview, I had that passion in me then, that I could see it in me, do you know?
That's one thing that was said to me at many interviews, is passion. Like, what's jumping out at me, Paul, is you now, and I've used this, I coined this phrase all the time to say, I use my poison, my difficult background as my potion.
Yeah.
That's now my weapon and my sword. Like, no one knows trauma like I know trauma. I work in trauma, brain injury, mental health.
Yeah.
I know it, I can speak, I know what trauma is.
Yeah.
You know what deprivation is, you know what being discriminated, inequality,
Yeah.
you know, treated, left outside.
Yeah.
Now you go in armed with that, plus you have the academic skills, you have the language, the intellect.
Exactly, yeah.
That's
it. It's proper, like, it's proper ammunition, you know, like you're literally going in like where it's fireworks, you know, like. So that's when I'm in, even the stuff I've done in my work, or in a personal capacity, the work I've done in a personal capacity, around this social economic ground, it's almost like, you know, when you have that experience and then you have a passion then to change things, because you realise the changes that can be made only from living that, is that drives you on to where then you don't even see it then as a work, you know. Like, there's been some times where when I was trying to get into jobs, like, now when I say jobs, and I don't mean any disrespect to say working in precarious work, you know, like say working in Centra for a while, but it's very precarious as in like they're giving you not guaranteed hours. So when I say I was looking for a job, I was looking for a more secure job where I knew I'd still be working 6 months down the line. I didn't,
Gotcha.
you know, so there was times when I was working in those where I just wasn't happy, and I literally had to drag myself out, you know, because it wasn't that I was passionate about, you know. So that's where I got to this day. And from then, in a personal capacity over the last few years, basically there's been a movement now going in the inner city of mobilising people in the inner city, letting them know about their rights. You'll often hear people in the inner city talking about what they've experienced, but when they're talking about it, you know, and it's completely understandable, they're not using that rights-based language which every other group that's marginalised now uses. Like, you know, like if you talk to a traveller, they'll say, I'm being discriminated because I'm a traveller. You know, if you talk to, say, someone that's certain ethnic minorities that are treated unfairly, like, you know, they'll say, like, I'm being treated unfairly because of, you know, and they know and they know how they can take a complaint, and they know where they can put it up to a service or an employer if they're treated unfairly, to where you'll get a lot in the inner city. It's very ad hoc, where people will, you know, they be saying it, but it isn't clear. You know, they be like, well, we were treated like that because of our accents and our where we were born and where we were put into. Do you know what I mean? So, but that's the thing. The last 2 years, it was mobilising people. I got on Twitter for a good while, and I don't really like Twitter just because it's very toxic. But people were saying to me, you need to get onto Twitter just to reach. There's a lot of people on Twitter who are in positions of power, stakeholders who can make a difference. So I went on for about 2 years, and it was just raising the history of the inner city, talking about the industrial schools, sometimes light-hearted stuff as well, just like the whole thing around, like, even with me dad, pigeon racing. You know, just like little things like that, or horse culture in the inner city as well. And it was just to build up like a case, because when you go onto Twitter, there's a lot of social justice issues people are talking about, but class was one that wasn't really talked about. And it was absolutely brilliant in that sense, because I connected with a lot of people who are working in the equality space that reached out to me, like, look, this is like something the dogs on the street knows about, but no one has ever like pulled the trigger on. Everyone knows this is going on. Do you know, and people who are working on different issues were like, look, I want to help in any ways. And do you know, so many different organisations reached out to me, like FLAC, Free Legal Aid Clinic. There only last week I spoke at the 20th anniversary of the Equal Status Act. That's one aspect of the equality legislation. And even then, just from campaigning around it there, the government in 2020, when the government was formed with the Greens, Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, they committed to the social economic ground, so they've included it in the programme for government.
Right.
So that's a commitment that they are going to basically eventually put it in. So what the stage they're at now is they're exploring all the other European countries that have it in place, the definition they use, what's the pros, what's the negatives. And then outside of that, there was a bill in 2017 from Jim O'Callaghan. Jim O'Callaghan resurrected the whole fight. This has been going on since 1998. In 2017, he put forward the social economic bill again, and it got to the third stage of the Oireachtas, and the government of the time, Fine Gael, put a money message on it. So they basically froze the bill. And this is a kind of thing governments can use, money messages, is where they say they can freeze bills where they feel it will cause untold economic consequences for the state. So what they were essentially saying was, this is a type of discrimination that we have fears about, that if some people are allowed to take complaints against, and then where the state is obligated to include, it will open the floodgates, and there'll be too many people taking complaints because it is such a big issue. So they basically froze it because it was too much of it. They felt it was too much of an issue of discrimination in society that the Workplace Relations Commission won't be able to handle it. Now, that's madness. That's basically saying, if inequality is too much, well, we won't be able to legislate on it because we don't have the resources for it. Now, that was what the essence of what a money message is to be used for. But it was used as well because, you know, they didn't want it to go through, and the way that government at the time, the way it was stacking up, it was always bills could keep getting voted through. So they blocked it, but when they blocked it, in fairness to them, they said, we don't disagree with this, we want to just do a further study on it. So they tendered for the study, which is currently being done, on how it's going to go into the legislation. So that bill died when the new government was formed. That's what it achieved. So a lot of us in the inner city then were working then on how we would do the bill again. So Chris Andrews, who's a politician in the south inner city. Obviously, like, a politician puts the bills through. We don't have the power to do that. So when they were thinking about doing a bill again, they met with a lot of us in the inner city to actually hear the real life examples and how, it's people from the inner city. It's not obviously like a legal specialist can frame and define the legislation act, but the actual how it's defined and what indicators are included, like say accent, address, homelessness, what's going to be under the social economic ground, like what are the subcategories. So we were explaining all the real life examples that's happened to everyone. Like one chap was explaining even about, this happened even in our school, when they had for their graduation, the teachers booked one of the pubs in the IFSC. The teachers show up, everything's grand. When the local kids and their mas and dads were showing up to these pubs in the IFSC, the bouncers and the management had a conniption fit and refused them. But they let the teachers in because the teachers booked it, so they didn't know that everyone from the flats and all were going to be showing up with their kids. Do you know what I mean? So they're real life examples where, if you go to the WRC, they always talk about comparators. They'll be like, well, how would you prove social class discrimination happened? The people with the lived experience are explaining them, because they're still being like, well, how would you define it? Like, who would be like being discriminated? So it would be like, look, if someone booked and the teachers are going in, but then the people from the local community are denied access. Wow. Similar to, this is a type of discrimination that happens travellers as well. They try ring up to book somewhere, or they get someone who isn't a traveller to book, and they're allowed in, but then when they rock up to go in, then they're refused.
Yeah.
Same thing.
I used to do that. I was a doorman. I was from the inner city. I worked in Bray.
Yeah.
I was told by the managers, don't let scumbags in from town.
Yeah.
And I refused blokes and their mas and as that I used to work on building sites.
And that's it. Like, it good that you say that. Like, there was a study done in the inner city with doormen, and the majority of the doormen were all from working class backgrounds, and some of them were travellers as well. Basically, because a lot of them worked for agencies, what they were saying in the study, and this was all anonymised to protect their identities as well, was that they were saying, well, look, it does me head in like that. It's always, if I get hired to work on the door on 6 different places, they then know me as a safe pair of hands from the agency, and it's like, well, he's not to be letting in the local rough crowd, not to be letting in anyone from the inner city, not letting travellers in either. They were the two things that was constantly said to them. So if they were letting anyone in, or trouble was happening on the shifts they were working, they were getting a bad name. So then the bar would never hire them then again, from the agencies. Yeah. So they were saying in the studies, they were like, it sickens me, because it's like I'm refusing the same people that's from my background, but I can't, because if I get a name for myself that he's letting all the riff-raff in, I won't get work again. I'd be seen as, sure, that fella run your business into the ground. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I had the shame of that.
So that's another thing that we were talking about, is that, like, where people are, like that would be another, if you had a social economic ground, you'd be able to take a complaint. Insurance as well. There's if you ring up for car insurance, health insurance, your address, your economic background, all comes into play in what type of quote that you're going to get. So if you live in a flat complex, or if you live in a halting site, you're either going to get denied insurance, or you're going to get a higher quote, because you don't have secure parking, and insurance companies base their quotes on statistical risk. So these figures they always come up with, they never present them to anyone. No one knows. Like, it's like they're like, oh, we have this famous data center where we can prove things on statistical risk. So you probably remember there a few years ago. Do you remember there was like, they can't discriminate anymore on gender? Do you remember the way women were getting better because they were saying on statistical risk men are more likely to crash the car? So they basically were saying, well, we give people from flat complexes or housing sites higher insurance quotes, because they're statistically more likely to get their car robbed, or they're more like, do you know what I mean? So there are other issues where you could clearly take a complaint, or then even say you've worked all your life and you go in, you've rented a car to go on a holiday in Ireland each summer, and then you retire, and you go in and you're on an unemployment payment or a pension payment or whatever. Well, then it's policy of certain car rental companies here, they don't rent to unemployed people. Now, there's no justification around that, because they could argue, oh well, like if they crash the car, they won't have money to pay for it. Now, when you go in to rent a car, if you don't have a credit card, like some companies, basically they take a holding fee. Now, that's all you should be asked for. So basically, if you're unemployed, you could have savings up to 12 grand, right, in your bank, right? I could be working and I could be up to my eyes in debt, and I'm living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
I can go in, but because I work, they'll rent the car to me, and if I crash the car, I'm not going to be able to pay for that. To where you go in and you're unemployed and you're like, look, you can even take a holding fee. I don't have a credit card, I just have a bank card. You can take whatever, the €600 holding fee as an insurance. They still won't rent the car to you. Do you know what I mean? And you'll often see it a lot. It breaks my heart, like with homeless people, and especially now we've the homeless people that normally wouldn't have been homeless as well, like that. You know, families, they're going around from emergency accommodation, they're ringing hotels. If a hotel doesn't like the look of you, what they'll say sometimes, and hostels do this as well, they basically say, because you have hostels that cater to homeless people, but you've hostels then that cater to the student types that come here to stay for a while. What they do is they'll say, you need a credit card, you need to book the room with a credit card. But then it's like, are you asking everyone they need to book their room with a credit card, or you're just asking people you don't like the look of? So you'll often hear that with homeless people. When they go in, they've cash to pay for the night, and then they get refused because they don't have a credit card. You know, so but it isn't like that's a standard policy. They're just using that. And then the other aspects of it as well, like, you know, people going for a job, you put your addresses down, you know, and then you put other addresses down. There's been studies done like that, or even other ones that a guy was explaining about. He got a check for a grant while he was in college, and he went in to cash the check for the grant in the bank. And the clerk said, oh, hold on a minute. The manager came out. The manager's like, you sure this is your check? Are you sure that well, you know, like treating them in a suspicious way, in front of everyone.
Wow.
And holding on there to make sure it's checked, and then waiting there while they verify it, you know, like mad stuff like that.
Jesus,
but they're all the kind of examples. And then if you look across social media, if you were to type in a random check just on Google, if you just type in like inner city scum, inner city knackers, or anything, it is absolute the floodgates. The amount of like well done content, articles, videos, which don't just encourage violence against people from the inner city, they're mocking them, you know, they're belittling them. You had a campaign there last year and this year which was basically trying to inform English language students basically that people that live in flat complexes or halting sites need to be avoided at all costs. They live with state benefits, you know, all they do is rape, they rob, they live off social welfare benefits, and Irish society doesn't like them. Now, you had English language teachers saying this in videos that was reaching an audience of 50,000 people each time they done a video.
Wow.
You had companies as well, and in fairness, the companies apologised for it, but they're the things that's going on. And when we talk about the need for social economic ground as well, all that stuff has been allowed to go on because no one has the power when it's only happened to nip it in the bud. You'd be like, look, this is stuff that's going on, and English language students who don't know any better, if I went over to Brazil, I went over to Spain, and there's all this information being done by credible sources telling me avoid these neighbourhoods, avoid these type of people, this certain profile at all costs, do you know, they're taking that then at face value. Do you know, it's developing stereotypes. Like, we can't at the moment get any of that nipped in the bud and took off. Like, if you contact Facebook, Instagram, anywhere, YouTube, they basically say it's not part of the legislation.
It's unreal.
So what's happened over the last 5 years, that's festered to where it's just widespread. To where now, if you looked there, say people say encouraging violence on race or gender or anything, it is they have the tools to get it all took down. And you'll often hear in working class communities, people will say, and this is where some of the truth comes in, but they don't understand why this is happening. You'll often hear working class people say, well, how are they always able to get things done, or like, do you know, like how are people able to get things done when there's racism going on? It's because they've the tools. It's not the person affected by racism that you know is getting. Do you know, they have legislation and they have tools to address it to where we don't. And that's what I'd often say to people. It's like, you know, when, like, even in Sheriff Street, the way you have the wall that separates Sheriff Street from the IFSC and all, and they're looking up at a lot of rich, wealthy people from a wide range of different nationalities. It's complete classism going on, do you know. It's economic, social segregation, do you know. But that's why I'd be saying to them, like, you can't. There's no point taking your anger out at other groups that are probably going through similar things to yourself. The reason why we can't do anything about it is because there's a reason why we've been left out of the legislation, and there's a big fear. It's like, right, it's all well and good providing rights if the group it's for is a fairly small minority, but if you bring in social economic status, it's not just going to empower the inner city community. Places like Moyross, places in Cork, up in Donegal where you've huge deprivation, it's going to give working class, it's going to flip things, and that scares the shite out of a lot of the establishment, because then it's not just about giving a few little tokenistic positions, do you know, because the population is so small. When it comes to social economic status, it's a much bigger population that they be dealing with, that they'll need to ensure the quality. So that's been another reason why there's been such reluctance to get it in. But where it's at the moment, with kind of that bill that got froze there with Jim O'Callaghan, Chris Andrews done up a bill, and he wanted to actually meet with people who's been affected by it. So we were given all those examples, and that's when you look at the new bill, the social economic bill now, to include it into quality legislation, you can really see that it's in detail. It includes the comparators as well. It basically tries its best to make sure that there's no kind of gaps in it, you know what I mean, that it will be enforceable. So that's passed through the first stage, and now it's at the second stage. And while all this is going on, the government also have a study that's going to be coming out soon, which we're hoping it will recommend that it includes it also. And the Minister, Roderick O'Gorman, the Minister for Equality, he's said he's committed to it as well. So what I'm hoping is that, like, there's no more kind of studies being done. I don't know if they're going to vote in Chris Andrews' bill, but what it essentially will do, if they don't vote it in, perhaps Roderick O'Gorman is, you know, they've already been working along this as well. They'll take some aspects of it in, but they'll say, well, we have our own plans in place, and this is where we're going to implement this. So we've got to that stage. We're literally on the cusp of it going in, and this fight has been going on a long time. In 1996, when they just start talking about quality legislation, it was talked about then, including it, and it didn't go in 1998 with the other 9 grounds. And there's been a fight that's kind of gone on. In 2004, it looked like it was going to go in, and then the can got kicked down the road, and then kind of faded away for a while. But then with the recession in 2008, this issue came up again. It was like, we still can't, we're operating basically a work around social justice and equality that's leaving class out. And you probably noticed this as well, like in the 90s and then in some aspect of the 2000s, when we were hearing about equality and all in the inner city, it was all about empowering community groups. But what's happened because of the equality legislation, it's a vital tool to basically get what you need. So say people are using that. So what happened is, then you say you have a disability group, they're fighting for disability, age group, religion. So they have all moved on and advanced their issues to where class is just being floating around. And you see it a lot in England, you see it in Ireland. Working class communities, this notion, we've kind of been left behind. So that's, if it goes in, it is going to, it's not going to, like everything, discrimination is still going to exist, but it's going to make a big difference in how we're empowered to do something about it.
Deadly, wow. You've done some amazing work. Just thinking about your story, the journey that you've been on, you articulate extremely well. Like unbelievable speaker of your passion. It just oozes out of you. What's the one thing you'd like people to take away after listening to this interview? I'm blown away by it, by the way.
Yeah, I suppose it's that whatever people are kind of going through, you know, whatever you've lived, and if it's, you know, if you're getting knocked down and knocked down, um, don't be thinking all the time. You need to, you know, resilience is a great thing, in that whatever you're dealing with, that's almost developing a skill in yourself, and use that to empower your situation as well, because when you finally get what you want, you've built up resilience. And give you just like a quick example, like if you grow up in hardship and you grow up where you're not part of, say, the establishment or anything, you need to go the long way to get your foot in the door. But when you finally get in, you've resilience from whatever shit you needed to deal with growing up in life. When you come across a stressful situation at work, it isn't a stressful situation, and you're looking at other people, your colleagues, and they're stressed to the gills about it. If, you know, you get kicked down and things don't work for you, you know, sometimes it isn't seen as an issue. So I think that's something to take. I don't want to be saying to people here, like, oh, if you've a dream, just believe in it. Live in the moment of it. Whatever's happening to you, processes in your mind is way of, like, you know, that's just what happens in life. And how do you deal with it, how do you overcome it, and use it to your advantage then. So as people say, then the cream will then eventually rise to the top.
Deadly. Oh man, I absolutely love it. I love your story. I love your passion. I could see her just listening to you thinking that's deadly. Andy over there, Andy's mad into history, he's mad into politics, he's mad into social justice, and I know he's over there loving this, and I absolutely loved it. I didn't know what you were going to come and speak about. I knew you were involved in inner city activism and inequality, and I know you work for the government, you have a civil servant job. That's unbelievable. Like, how inspirational are you going to be to young lads and ladies from the flats? You know, you just you're a class act.
Yeah, but one thing just before I finish up, that's another thing that hopefully is coming down the line. I linked in with business in the community there a few months ago, and they have got 40 big multinational employers assigned to a charter, and it was making sure social economic status was included in it as well. So basically we've a good load of employers now signed up that they will be, when they're doing inclusive action, it's getting people from the likes of the flats that want to try to get a career. And also the civil service now have committed to extend it to the social economic ground. So because of this movement as well, there's a load of employer services that they're not waiting for the legislation to come in to tell them to do it. They are proactively now, because they know, you know, it's a right ethical thing to be doing.
Deadly.
You can't progress equality and then leave out one aspect of it, you know. So, you know, hopefully may it continue and get stronger.
Paul, you're an absolute legend, man. Thanks very much for coming on the show. Really appreciate that. Absolutely blew my mind. It opened my eyes, you know, and I love hearing your story. It's just phenomenal. Okay, so there we go. There's another absolutely whopper story from the flats. Yup, the flats. Yup, the flats. I fucking love it. I love the flats. Like, there's a theme going right across all these interviews. It's so similar, and I'll round it all up when we come to the end. It's just resilience. Oh, look, I'm buzzing with pride, and it sets me on fire. I love it, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed that as much as we do. It was absolutely phenomenal. Paul is an absolute phenomenal human being. His story is deadly. Resilience, passion, love, kindness, and just equality, and just love for people in the flats. It's deadly. It's everything we ask for. I want to thank Noel Riley from Rooney Media Graphics, Andy from Liberty Media's Hub, the girls from Shannon's Hope Line, the lads from Liberty Soup Run, all the people from the Liberties, all the people from the flats, south and north. Yup, the flats. Thanks very much for all the support that you give us. Share this with family and friends. If you love our work and you want to buy us a coffee,